Woody Johnson, sell the team.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, October 29th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and our episode today is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, on today's show, we're going to talk about what your options are as a Jets fan during this difficult time following the team. We're going to talk about why a loss of hope is the worst thing you can have as a sports fan. But before we get to that, I have an appeal to the owner, and it's simple. Sell the team. The Jets are awful this season. The Jets have been awful for well over a decade right now. This team is on its way to a 14th straight season with no playoffs. That is the longest streak in professional sports in North America, not just in the NFL, in any of the four major sports. And at some point, I think you owe it to your fan base to either produce or sell the team. And you, as an owner, Woody Johnson, have shown that you cannot produce. You have shown that you are completely incapable of producing because the product that has been put on the field is a direct reflection of you. It's a direct reflection of your vision or lack of vision for this team. You are the person who is taking control of this team. You cannot blame anybody else. You love scapegoating everybody. You love finding somebody to blame for your own terrible decisions. At some point, you need to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I'm not capable of doing this. I owe it to my fan base to find somebody who is capable of doing this. Because maybe I'm old school about this and maybe I'm naive, but I don't think at the end of the day, the NFL or an NFL team is purely a business. And I know this league is around to make money. I know that the teams are at the end of the day billion-dollar corporations. You wouldn't be able to know that by the way the Jets are run. If a corporation ran itself the way the Jets are run in the real world, not in the NFL world where teams can print money no matter how effectively they operate. If the Jets were running a business in the real world, they would have been shut down long ago because there's no way a real business could survive operating this way. But you know what? I think that there are certain companies and they're just so beloved by their consumer base. They have such brand loyalty that, and again, maybe this is naive of me, but I just think that, you owe it to your customers that you have to do your best to produce a good product. If you don't, then you got to get out of the way and find somebody who can. And I think that professional sports teams are above all of these other companies in that area where the league does not exist without the fans. Your team does not exist without the fans. And you can't keep treating your fans terribly. You can't keep giving a terrible product to your fans over and over. These are not toys. And I think there are too many people like Woody Johnson, too many billionaires who own these teams who just think that this is like a plaything. They think it's cool to be around athletes. They think that this is like the teams exist for them. 2 weeks ago today, this was after the Jets traded for Devontae Adams. Woody Johnson was stopped by a reporter, Judy Batista, who tweeted out, "An optimistic Woody Johnson arrives at the owners' meetings in Atlanta. I asked him if the season is still salvageable. Salvageable, he said. We're going to kick. You can fill the word in." End quote. What kind of person talks like this? What kind of person talks like that in general? But what kind of person talks like that when you own a team that at the time was 2-4 and was showing signs that the season was falling apart? Much less a person who owns the team with the longest playoff drought in professional sports. A guy who has shown no capability of building a winning product. That's how he responds to a reporter who asks a very reasonable question at 2-4. 2-4 is really tough to come back from. Maybe it's doable, but it's not easy to do. That's how he responds. And when you answer a question like that, it makes it sound like you just view this team as your toy. Through the years, I've said something to my listeners, and if you've heard me say this, I've come to realize that this is wrong. I've said that the owner should stay out of football affairs. I've always said you should delegate to the football people. There's a problem with that statement, though. The way NFL teams operate make it impossible for the owner to not be part of big decisions. And it's not so much that the owner can't be involved in big decisions. It's that the owner needs to know the time and place to assert himself and the correct advice to give. You may remember Woody Johnson was the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom for 4 years. Well, the last NFL owner prior to Woody Johnson, who was an ambassador, was Dan Rooney, the legendary owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And there's a story. It's become legendary, I think, in league circles. In 2004, the Steelers were drafting, and there was a question, would they draft Ben Roethlisberger? And the story goes that there were a number of key members of the Steelers organization, among whom Bill Cowher, the Hall of Fame coach, one of the great football minds of his era, who were kind of skeptics about drafting Roethlisberger. And Dan Rooney stepped in, and Dan Rooney relayed what had happened 21 years earlier to that franchise. When the Steelers were in a similar position, there was a blue chip quarterback prospect available to them in the first round, and they passed on him. That quarterback was Dan Marino. Dan Marino was a local product. He had played collegiately at the University of Pittsburgh, and the Steelers passed on him. And Rooney relayed the story of how much that had set the Steelers franchise back, how much better the Steelers would have been with Dan Marino. And the Steelers ended up picking Roethlisberger. A few months earlier, Wellington Mara, the owner of the Giants, one of the early founders, one of the early pioneers of the NFL in ownership, had hired Tom Coughlin as his head coach over the reservations of some of his key football people. In the NFL, you can't really have a situation where the owner isn't involved in key decisions. If you do, you're kind of putting yourself at a disadvantage. Now, I know like Green Bay doesn't have an owner, so ownership can't really be involved, but the other 31 teams, you've got an owner. Now, can you imagine Woody Johnson giving advice that wise in a key spot for the Jets? We can't. It hasn't happened. That's part of the reason the Jets are in this mess. An owner needs to know when to step in and the correct advice to give when he steps in. Unfortunately, Woody gets this all wrong, and he'll never dedicate. He will never delegate completely to his football people. He doesn't know how to delegate, and he doesn't know when to step in. And look, I know that I'm just a guy here with a podcast, and I know I can't do anything to force Woody Johnson to sell this team. But since I have a humble platform here, I feel like I have to do everything I can to speak on behalf of this Jets fan base. And I know Woody Johnson's not listening to this podcast, but I also know that there are people in that building who do listen to what I have to say. Maybe only a few, but I know for a fact there are people in the team facility who follow what I have to say. If you're one of those people, I think you know everything I've just said is correct. And I don't know what you can do. I don't know what influence you have. And I don't know what I can do going forward. But what I will commit to you is that I think there's a good chance you agree with me that Woody Johnson needs to sell this team. And there are very few mechanisms fans can go to. I don't know if there's any mechanism a fan can go to force the owner to sell. But if you have any ideas, I'll listen to them. And you can rest assured that I will do everything I can to try and put as much pressure as I can on this owner. I will try and compel him to sell this team. I can't force Woody Johnson to sell this team. I know the people listening, even the handful of people who may be listening in the team facility, can't force him to sell this team. But I think we all have a role to play right now. And we need to make it clear to this owner that what's happening is unacceptable. And if he cannot do the job to get this team where it needs to go, then it's time for him to step out of the way. Because you know something? Woody Johnson bought this team in 2000 for $635 million. That's million with an M. Forbes just estimated that the Jets are worth over $7 billion. That's with a B. So Woody Johnson's not going to be hurting if he sells this team. But he'll stop hurting his fans, loyal fans who make this league. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about why this period's so difficult for Jets fans. And I think it comes down to one simple thing. As a fan, there's one thing you can never lose, and that's hope. You can lose games, but it's really tough when you lose hope. And we'll go into that in more detail here as we continue on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Right now, the Jets are 1.5-point home underdogs to the Houston Texans on Thursday Night Football. Jets and Texans will kick off week 9 of the NFL season in the Meadowlands. Again, Houston's a 1.5-point favorite. That line's moved. The Jets opened as 1.5-point favorites, and it feels like that loss in New England has finally gotten people to, view this Jets team the way it is. Not a very good football team, a team that faces very long odds, and among those odds, 1.5-point spread against the Houston Texans. But on FanDuel, again, you get $150 in bonus bets if you win on any $5 bet. Just visit fanduel.com to join today. Again, it's fanduel.com. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. If you're a Jets fan, I'm sure you've been feeling it for the last couple of weeks, but especially these last couple of days. This team, we thought it had such potential. We had such optimism for this team, and they're 2-6. It was tough enough to see this team start 2-5, but losing to the New England Patriots on Sunday, that was inexplicable. And that's just the type of thing that's tough to come back from. And I think part of what is tough to come back from is this team does not really give you any reason for hope right now. See, I think a lot of fans, now there are always exceptions. There are always the fans that'll go crazy if your team doesn't win the Super Bowl that year. It doesn't matter what your situation is. Most fans, though, can live with losing if they feel like it's for a greater purpose. Your team that makes the playoffs for the first time, you go out in the wild card round. Then maybe the next year you go to the divisional round. Then maybe the next year you go to the conference championship. You view that as like a stepping stone. You can move forward. A team that loses, but like you're getting a good draft pick. You get maybe a draft pick that's going to turn your franchise around. You can live with that. A reset year. A year where your cap situation was ugly and you've got to, you've just got to bite the bullet. You've just got to deal with it that year. But you know what? After this season, your cap situation is going to be really good. You're going to be able to sign a lot of good free agents. You can live with that. The Jets situation right now is hopeless because this team went all in. And when you go all in and you win, it's great. You win the jackpot. But not enough time is spent thinking about what happens if you go all in and lose. You lose everything. And the Jets have lost everything. This is not a team that really was built for tomorrow. It's not a team that was building to anything. This is the year it had to happen. And it's not happening. And it's not even a situation where, if the Jets didn't win the Super Bowl this year, but they got to the divisional or the AFC championship game, they lost a tight contest and Aaron Rodgers looked really good. You could say, all right, next year we'll get him. We still got a shot next year. All the key players, and we talked about heading into this season how the Jets were going to be dependent. We spent all offseason talking about how the Jets would be depending on a lot of older players, a lot of players who were injury risks, and there was some gamble to this. And this was a Jets team that had a very wide range of potential outcomes. I've said many times over the course of the offseason that the Jets, the over under for the Jets on wins tended to be around the 9-win range, maybe 9.5 wins. If you play out the season 100 times for your typical team projected to get 9 wins, you get a lot of 7s, a lot of 8s, a lot of 9s, a lot of 10s. The Jets were a team that had a really wide range of outcomes because there were going to be a bunch of 6s in there, some 5s. There were also some scenarios where maybe they'd win 11 or 12, maybe even 13. Unfortunately, we're getting the really, really low end of that spectrum right now. And that's not a place we could be because this is not a team that has a tremendous amount of young talent. Now, the good news is that they still have the guys who used to be young talent are about to enter their prime. So the cupboard is not completely bare. It may not be quite as bad as it seems, but this is still a team that's been short on draft picks the last couple of years, a team that's given up a lot of draft picks, and a team that, at least in the short term, does not have a great cap situation. Now, things could turn around quicker than you expect in the NFL, but I think part of the reason the reaction like this is that it just feels so hopeless. And I think it goes beyond the specifics that I just mentioned. It goes to the owner. Because do you trust that Woody Johnson can turn this around? Because of what I saw, and I've complained about this a lot on the show, that we say the Jets are in a perpetual rebuild, but the Jets have never really, during this stretch, tried to do a real rebuild where they actually, focused on building through the draft, doing the things the good teams do. There's always been these quick fix moves. And the only time I think the Jets ever fully committed to a rebuild as a franchise was the 2021-2022 period. And that's really when they started to value draft picks. They traded Sam Darnold for 2. They traded Jamal Adams for a couple ones. They stockpiled picks. And for all the mistakes Joe Douglas made, and Joe Douglas made a lot of mistakes, it actually felt like the franchise had direction for the first time. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the Jets beating the Buffalo Bills to go 6-3 in 2022. And for all the issues the team had, I remember that after that game, I felt like the Jets are finally moving in the right direction. And now here we are 2 years later, and it's nothing but destruction. And it was brought by the owner because the owner took control. The owner made a lot of bad decisions. And one thing I want to be clear about is, if you were excited about this team, and if you were excited about the Aaron Rodgers trade, you shouldn't blame yourself. It's right to be excited when your team makes a big move. You want to believe in your team. The problem is the owner, because there were real gambles that the owner did not appreciate. The owner was all in on Aaron Rodgers. Well, Jets didn't ask the tough questions about Rodgers. It's easy to say Rodgers came here and this was a shock. It's easy to even blame the Achilles injury on all of his decline. But here's the thing. Rodgers' numbers were in decline for 2 years. He was coming off his worst season at 30, and he was 39 years old. These were red flags that should have been raised. And it's not just that the Jets ignored them. The Jets made Rodgers their only plan. It's one thing if Aaron Rodgers, if you can swing a trade for Aaron Rodgers and you can, he's the best option available, and you just roll forward with him with the team you built. The Jets retrofitted everything around Aaron Rodgers. They brought in Nathaniel Hackett. They rebuilt their entire offense around Rodgers. They bring in Alan Lazard. They bring in Randall Cobb last year. They do everything to placate Rodgers. And not only that, there was no plan B. If the Jets had struck out on Aaron Rodgers, they would have been out in the wilderness last year at the quarterback position. And they allowed this thing to pretty much take control of their entire offseason. They were frozen a year ago in the offseason because they were trying to get Rodgers. Again, it's one thing to trade for Aaron Rodgers, one thing to say he's the best option available, and he still may have been. But it's another to handle it the way the Jets did. But that's the owner. The problem with Woody Johnson, I've talked about this a lot, is that he always thinks that this team is one move away from winning. He doesn't honestly assess things, and he doesn't honestly assess the quality of his options. And we've seen this over and over again this year. When the Jets get off to a slow start. So Robert Saleh, a year ago, at the end of last season, Woody Johnson was saying we got to keep continuity. They get off to a slow start this year. Continuity is out the window. We got to fire Robert Saleh. That's going to fix everything. Then they lose. They bring in Devontae Adams. That's going to fix everything. And we talked about how there were bigger problems with this team, and that you can't just fix one issue. You can't just think that there's one move that's going to fix all your problems, because there were other problems with this team. One of them was the kicker that they didn't address. And the reason that they didn't address it is that they thought Devontae Adams would fix everything. They thought the kicking game's not really a problem. Well, now that we have Devontae Adams, everything's going to be great. And they'll probably cut Greg Zuerlein this week, and Greg Zuerlein should be cut. But it's not going to fix all the problems with this team. And this speaks to a bigger issue, is that if the players are bad, you can change the players. If the coaches are bad, you can change the coaches. If the general manager is bad, you can change the general manager. You can't change the owner. And I just can't shake the feeling that, the reason this feels so hopeless is that even if the team does right things, there's just the sense now that Woody Johnson's going to take over and screw everything up. The man has to sell the team. Folks, I'll do everything in my power. If you have any ideas, let me know. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, I want to offer some final thoughts as I close this show on what it means to be a fan. If you're really struggling with this team right now, what your options are. I want to close the show on this note, because I think it's really important to discuss, and we will discuss it as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, and the Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, and Again, I'm pushing for Hillsdale to add a course on how to run an NFL team semi-competently, and we'll enroll Woody Johnson into that one right away. But you should know that all of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, and discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockdown to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockdown to register. Hillsdale.edu/lockdown. Our episode of Locked On Jets today is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your pick in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. It's a difficult time to be a New York Jets fan. I feel it and I hear it when I speak with my fellow Jets fans. I obviously interact with a lot of Jets fans. It's just tough right now. There was so much excitement around this team, and that's after what's been a brutal 13 years where this team can't get out of its own way. They can't build a winner. They they fail every single time. They make all the wrong moves, and it's gotten a lot of fans to a breaking point. And I understand the difficulty on this because when you're growing up, when you first start watching sports, there's a code. Your team is your team. You got to stick with your team through thick and thin. And I feel a lot of trepidation when I talk with fans right now about what's happened to this team. And I feel like there are a lot of fans out there who are losing their attachment to the team. And I can't really blame you. And I feel like some fans feel bad about that. Some fans, feel like maybe they're being disloyal to the team. And it's tough because, again, you grow up and you think that this team is your team's your team. You don't give it up. You're with them through the joys, through the pains. But unfortunately, sometimes a team gives you nothing but pain. And we need to do something. I mean, we need to do something to get this owner to sell this team. So what do we do? And, people talk about boycotting the team. People talk about not putting any more money in this owner's pocket. People talk about, not going to the games, not renewing your season tickets. And I can't tell you to do any of that because I don't know your situation. It's easy for me to sit here and, say, oh, the Jets are ripping everybody off. And now there were reports. I haven't been able to confirm any of these reports, but there were reports last week that, the Jets prices for season tickets in 2025 are going up, which, way to read the room, Jets. Way to treat your fans well. You're putting out such a great product. No wonder it's tough. Not tough to believe you're raising the prices. This team makes it tough on itself sometimes, and it makes it tough on its fans. Should you boycott the Jets? I can't tell you what to do though, because I don't know your situation. I've come across people who have said, they bonded with their dad or, they bond with their son. It's a family thing to go to Jets games. I know some people who, maybe not have had the greatest relationship with their parents, but going to the Jets game is the thing that helps them, see eye to eye. It's the thing that, they do together. It's maybe the one area where they can really connect. I can't tell you to give that up. Maybe you just hit a rough time in your life. And despite how bad the Jets are, you still find some peace in going to the games. There's only 8 to 9 home games a year. Maybe with the Jets being bad and the prices being so ridiculous across the NFL, this is the one opportunity you'll have to take your kids to a game. And I remember when I was a kid and my first Jets game was the second Kotite year. It was a horrible game. It was a rainy day, the Sunday after Thanksgiving. The starting quarterback got injured for the season in pregame warmups. Neil O'Donnell. That's a true story. You can look that up. Thanksgiving '96 against the then Houston Oilers. Now they're the Tennessee Titans. Still a good memory though. It's up to you. But one thing I'd say is that if you need a break, it doesn't make you a bad fan. I think you reach a point. I think we all reach a breaking point where you're just expecting people are just expecting too much out of you. I went and found this old article by a writer. He was one of my favorite writers when I was growing up. Now he's a big podcaster. He doesn't really write anymore. Um, and he's kind of a controversial figure, but Bill Simmons, and he used to write for ESPN. And if you've everybody knows him for his podcast now, but if you followed his early work at ESPN, I mean, it was some of the most brilliant, relatable stuff I've ever seen written. And this was like at the infancy of sports blogs, so it was like revolutionary stuff. And he wrote this one article that always resonated with me. It was rules for being a sports fan. Now, Bill Simmons is not the ultimate authority. These are not binding regulations. But he wrote one of his rules was about loyalty to your team. And he wrote that once you choose a team, you're stuck with that team for the rest of your life. But then he wrote in some exceptions, unless one of the following conditions apply. One of the conditions is your team moves to another city. Another is that you grew up in a city that did not field a team for a specific sport, but you end up moving to a team. You end up moving to a city that has a team in a sport. So you grow up in a city that doesn't have an NFL team, but you move to New York and you start liking the Jets, for example. Another exception he had was one of your immediate family members either plays professionally or takes a job with that team. It's a pretty fair one, right? Another one is your favorite college star goes to a certain team and you don't have a team. But the last one, the one that really drew my eyes and seems very relevant, is he wrote, the owner of your favorite team treated his fans so egregiously through the years that you could not take it anymore. You would rather not follow them at all than support a franchise with this owner in charge. And he wrote that at the time, he wrote, just for the record, he reached this point with the Boston Bruins. When it happens, you have two options. You can either renounce the team and pick someone else, or you can pretend that they're dead, like you're a grieving widow. That's what I do. I'm an NHL widow. I don't even want to date another team. And I don't know that you need to go to those extremes. I don't agree that you should pick another team. And I don't know that you should renounce the Jets forever. But if you need to take a step back from the Jets, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. One of the great things that's been about, there haven't been a lot of great things about this season. And I hate the primetime games. And that's a selfish thing for me because, I have to do these podcasts and it's really tough to stay up late after the game to record the podcast. So maybe I'm a little bit of a baby when it comes to stuff like that. But one of the nice things about the primetime games is that, there have been Sunday afternoons where I've been able to go out and enjoy myself. And and one of the things I found is fall Sunday afternoons are beautiful. It can be a lot of fun when you're not sitting in front of the couch, sitting in front of the TV on the couch watching football. And if you need to take a couple of them this year for your own well-being, or if you just think your time's better spent doing that, I can't blame you. It doesn't make you a worse fan. If you just want to step away from the team, you shouldn't feel bad about it. Nobody should make you feel bad about it. I hope you still check in with me. I can tell you everything that's going on about the Jets. I have to watch this stuff. But you don't have to. You can check in with me. You can always, if you listen to the podcast, you can send me an email. You can go to my writings. I'll let you know what's going on. And then maybe when the team's a little bit better, when the team's more worthy of your time, you can check back in again. But I think after the way the Jets have performed and the way the owner has treated this fan base, you've earned it. If he's not going to sell the team, then you've at least earned the right to find a more enjoyable way, a more profitable way to spend your time, if that's what you choose. If it's not, if you want to keep watching the Jets, then keep watching the Jets. If you want to keep going to the games, keep going to the games. Find your own way to do it, though. I guess that's what it comes down to, is that when you're in a situation like this, there's no right or wrong way to handle it. It's just whatever suits you. I have to keep watching the games because we have this podcast, and this podcast, I hope this podcast is not going anywhere. So again, if you don't want to completely be disconnected from the team, look, I'd love to keep chatting with you. Keep tuning into the podcast. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, at least as best you can with the Jets playing the way they are. And send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we have our weekly mailbag scheduled. Talk to you then.